Can you hear me now? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate it. All right, we've still got a couple of minutes here before our scheduled start time, so I'll just wait, see if any more people are going to join us here. While we're waiting, I'll just point out that I got some feedback from this morning's session that my cursor was a little small and hard to see, hard to follow on the screen. So I've made an adjustment. I hope that'll be an easier to follow little version. So hopefully that'll help a little bit today. Okay, it is 1 o'clock and it looks like we have about the same number of people with us today as we did this morning. So I'm going to take it that we probably will continue with about the same number of people. So for all of you who have joined us a second time today, thank you so much. I hope that I will be able to give you enough good information today for it to have been worth your time. Welcome to our second onboarding of the day, our webinar of the day, the Shepherd Staff Finance Vendors and Transactions session. For this session, we're going to talk about your vendors, that's your payees, the people that you're paying money to in your system, and we'll talk about different transaction types and how you would generate them, and then the kinds of reporting that you would do on transactions and ways of viewing transactions once they're created. So we are ready to go, I believe. So let's go ahead and we'll start our slideshow here. As mentioned this morning, the webinars are being recorded and they will be a link will be sent to all the attendees later on once they're all prepared and ready to go. You probably won't see those today or tomorrow, but probably by the end of the week, and if not by early next week. So they'll also be available in the Help Center, and you'll be able to see them in under training, under the training videos in Shepherd Staff, which I will show you in this session. So just so that you'll get a chance to see how you can get to those. So I know that's always frequently a question we hear, so I want to make sure everybody knows you will get those. It just won't be immediate. So we'll go on. And as mentioned this morning, I'm your host. My name is Kimberly. I've been with the company about 3 years, a little over 3 years, and I really enjoy working with all of you out there in Shepherd Staff land. You guys have been a joy. I've done support in a lot of other contexts, and I haven't had such a kind bunch of customers ever before. So thank you for that. And so note that during the session, your phones and microphones have been muted. If you have questions as we go ahead and type those in the question box in the webinar, and hopefully we'll be able to get those answered during the webinar, but if not, we'll get to you after the webinar to make sure that we get you an answer. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide and introduce you my backup for today, for this afternoon. This is my colleague, Tim. Thank you so much for stepping in today. He will be listening in and watching that that question box. So if he is able to, he may answer those questions as we go, or we'll get to them during the question and answer session afterwards. So either of those options, and if necessary, I can always reach out to you by email after the session to get those questions answered. So thank you so much, Tim, for joining me today. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. I've already kind of given you a little bit of information, but first, this is our class agenda. We're going to talk about vendors, about how to add them and how to keep track of them and how to use them in transactions, which we're also going to talk about. We'll talk about the different transaction types, so payments. There's multiple different kinds of payments, and we'll see those different options. And then we'll talk about printing checks, and we'll talk about receipt transactions, which meaning like deposits, and we'll talk about journal entries and how they are tracked in or entered in Shepherd staff. We're also going to talk about recurrent transactions and how you can set those up, and then how you can generate them once they are set up. And then we will get to some reports that are relevant to these transactions. There is still one more finance onboarding tomorrow that's going to be specifically about reports, but this grouping of reports will be ones that are specifically related to transactions. So we'll talk about the general ledger report, transaction registers, so like your check register report and things like that. And then vendor reports, so the reports that are relative to your vendors, your payees. So, and then we'll have that little quiz again. And again, that'll be just for me to help me improve for my next session, so that I know what I've covered and whether I've covered it well. So we will go ahead and finish up with the Q&A session, and then I will let you have the rest of your afternoon. I've appreciated you spending so much of your day with me so far. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to switch us over to Shepherd staff here, and you'll see that we are in the activity view here. And we're going to start off here under vendors. So you'll see that in the finance module, you've got all of your different tabs for the different areas, and then under each tab you have different things. Now, activity is mostly for the things that you're doing in the system, like you're putting in those transactions and things. But because vendors are a part of those transactions, they're here under activity as well. So whenever you need to add a vendor, you'll go to activity, you'll select this vendors view, and you'll get a list of the ones that you have so far. If you're starting out from scratch, then it will be empty, but you can add all of the vendors that you need. So you'll see when you have your list, you can search it by vendor name, or you can look at the different vendor types that you might have. You can also filter by active and inactive vendors. So you have a lot of options for how to find the information that you want. And I apologize, I've got an itch right on the end of my nose. Of course I do, because I'm doing a webinar and being recorded. Speaking of which, I should give you more screen real estate. So I am going to turn off that camera so you won't catch me scratching my nose again. And now you can see the screen a little better probably. So I hope that helps. Let's take a look then at my vendor list. You'll see that I've got the name, what type of vendor they are, the last time we paid that vendor anything, their email address if we have it recorded, their phone number if we have that recorded. Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of faxes or websites recorded, but here's their address information. If there's more than one address, you can have those. And then the less, well, if there's more than one address line, I mean. And then if you have a customer number with them, then you can put that in. If you don't, that's okay too. Payment terms is a field you can fill in. It's not always necessary. And then you have some other options that you'll see here, which I'll show you inside of the vendor creation screens. So we're going to go ahead and add a vendor. And let's say that this first vendor we're going to add is a business. Let's say that it is one of those big general businesses, and it's just one that we want to be able to select when we're doing a credit card transaction so that we can show that transaction. So we're not necessarily entering in all of the contact information because we're not necessarily writing checks and mailing them to this vendor. We're going to say we're doing Aldi. So big national company, international company. And so we don't need all of the details. We don't need to put in a customer number. We don't have a customer number with them. We don't have a whole lot of special information for them, but we might put in our local Aldi's address if we wanted to, and phone number if we wanted to, or anything like that. We could certainly put in the Aldi website if we wanted to, but let's just say all we want is to be able to say on our credit card transaction that we are recording in Shepherd staff every time we come back from Aldi, that's where that money went. So we just want to put the name in there and nothing else. That's one of our most simple options. So I'm just going to save that, and then we'll be able to use that information. You'll see it's opening up now a record for Aldi. And since we didn't put in any of this information, it's just saying none. And then each of these is just like in your membership module when you open a person record or a household record, how you have the little sections. You can click on them to open or close them. So you could come back later if you decide that you do need to enter some kind of information. And you could say, well, none of this is relevant, but let's say I want to get to the address and I want to say that they're on 123 4th Street. Whoops, 4th Street. And they're in St. Louis, because that's where I am. Mo 63111, let's say. And USA. And so now I've added that. So I've edited them. I've added that in. I could put in their phone number if I had it. I'm going to go ahead and save. So then I can see, since this is a brand new vendor, I'm not going to see any current activity, or any of this information is not going to show up because I don't have any purchase orders. I don't have additional contacts for them. But this is what those views, this is where I could find those views if I had a vendor that did have those. So we're going to go ahead and close all that back up just so that you can see how it looks when you open and close them. And then I'm going to close this whole view and go back to my main list. And let's look at an existing vendor here. So let's look at Allied Trash and Recycling. I'm going to double click just to open that in the edit view. And you can see that I have a little bit of information already in there for them. I've got something in there under customer number, and I'll show you a little bit about why that's there later. And we've got our information, and here under activity, we can see the payments that we've sent to that person or that company in the past. So you see that there's some cleared transactions, there's some paid transactions, there's some voided transactions. Apparently we did something crazy on the 23rd, put a lot of information in that got voided. So you can see a lot of different information about a vendor if you have that information, like the activity. But like if you had multiple accounts for them, you'd see here's the, or multiple transactions for them, you'd see that there's a preferred account used for this one. So this is the expense account that usually has been selected when you sent a payment to Allied Trash and Recycling. So the system has selected it as being the preferred account associated with this vendor. So you can see different things like that. If you had a specific person that was your contact in here and you didn't have it in this view, you could go to additional contacts and you could add that person's name and their contact information here. So let's go back to the main view again. I'm going to create one more. We're going to do a little bit more personal of a business. Let's say this is a locally owned business and it's A1 Plumbing, let's say. They're our plumber. They come to the building and help us out when we have emergencies. It's very important, so we want to have them. And let's say we have a personal relationship with that company, that they have a customer ID for us. So that's going to be 543210000. That's our customer number in relation to A1 Plumbing. And let's say that they are at 99 9th Street, because I'm ever so very creative today. And they're also in St. Louis. Yes, let's add St. Louis to our list of choices. Did you see how when I typed that in, it popped up that option? And now I have that in a drop-down. Obviously, I already had that in a drop-down, but now I have it without a period as well. So St. Louis Mo 63118. Let's say this one is. And I've got, let's say it is Jim at a1plumbing.com is the email of the guy that I contact. So you'll see I have his email there, and it's a person's email. So since I've got that, I'm probably going to want to put him in as a contact as well. But I'll probably just repeat that email address. And then we'll say 314, that's the local area code, and then 555-1111. So I save that, it's going to open the record, and now I can go down under that additional contacts, which it's already got open because that's what I had open last, and I can say that this is Jim the plumber. And I could put that information if he had a separate email address or phone number from what I already had in there, I could. Let's go ahead and put the same one, 314-555-1111, and Jim at a1plumbing.com. Okay, so I could say Jim is our go-to guy at, and I could save that. So now I have a vendor that's got all the information, and we've got a personal contact for that, but we don't yet have any activity or any preferred accounts because we don't have any transactions in this for this vendor yet. So we're going to go ahead then and close out of here, and I'm going to show you one more vendor type that we might add. There are quite a few vendor types, so I'll actually show you that you have options here. You could do agencies, you could do another church as your vendor type, you can choose employee, etc. So you can do like the government, so like if you're doing for your tax payees and things like that, but we already have most of those in the system. You'll see down here the U.S. Department of the Treasury is right there. So let's say that we want to have one of our members. Let's say there's somebody that regularly goes out and picks up stuff for the church, and we reimburse them, but they're not employees, so we don't choose employee. We're going to go ahead and say they're a member. And when we do that, you'll see that we have this button here that says Connect to Person for Membership. If I click that, I can select a name from the list of all of my members. So let's say that we are going to, it's Giselle here, and she frequently does some shopping for the church. So we're going to link her. We're going to say link selected person, and it's going to go ahead and fill in for us her information. So now we have all of her contact information came over from her person record, and it's already automatically here. So she's not a business, so we don't really need a customer number or anything. We don't have payment terms with her. So we're just going to save her, and there's Giselle. So now that we have that, let's say we have old vendors that we're not using anymore. Let's say this Vietti Marketing. Now, let's go ahead and look at that record, and you'll see that we have activity, but not since all the way back in 2014. So I have options here. Let me take you back out to her to the main list here. And let's say that I try to delete. It says this vendor is attached to transactions. So to transactions, recurrent transactions, or purchase orders, and cannot be deleted. So you'll notice if there's that activity, you can't delete it. So if we go back, you'll notice that there's this inactive button. So if I choose to make that vendor inactive, I can save that. And now when I go back to my list and we go, do you see where it says no filter here? If I change it to only active vendors, they're not going to be in the list. So it saves me from having them in the drop down when I create a transaction. So if there's a vendor that I don't use all the time, I don't want to have to scroll past them to get to someone else. So I can make them inactive so that they won't be on my list here and they won't be in the drop down when I'm creating a transaction. So let's go ahead and move on and start talking about those transactions. So first of all, whoops, I didn't mean to close out all the way. So first of all, let's go to payments. So that's here right under activity. It's the very top one. This is where you're entering your checks and other kinds of payments. So we're going to move this over so we can see everything that's going on here. You'll see in the list that I have my document number, my date, the vendor, which we've just been talking about, the amount of the transaction, any description that was in that transaction, the status of the transaction. So you'll see that most of these say paid. Down here we have some that are cleared. That means they've already been reconciled with the bank statements. And then up here we have one that's pending. That's a check that has not yet been printed. Once it's printed, that status will change to paid. Then here you're going to see the type of payment it is. And you'll see that I've got most of them listed as EFTs, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. And then it shows which bank account was used and some more information here about the actual transaction. So if we want to add a new transaction, simple enough, just like we did in the vendors, we go down to the lower left corner and we click add. And you'll see that I have options here. Add a payment by, and I can add a check, I can add an EFT, or I can add a charge account payment. We're going to start by looking at checks. So we have one that's already there, and we're going to click here and we're going to create another one. As soon as I selected that option, it opened it up, and you'll see that right here it's defaulting to Central Trust Checking as the bank account that I'm making that transaction out of. And that's because that's the one that I used for my last check. It's actually the one that I've used for all the checks that you can see on the screen here. But if I wanted to, I can click this little edit button and select a different bank account. So if I wanted to try and write a check out of, say, my Central Trust savings account or one of my farmer's bank accounts, I could do that. I'm not going to, because we're going to go ahead and use Central Trust Checking. But if you create your first transaction if you have multiple bank accounts, after you create your first transaction, if you want to switch between bank accounts, you just do it right from here after you've opened the transaction view. So you just click the pencil, select your account, click select, and then it'll go to that bank account. So you'll see that it says paid by check because that's what I selected. And if I see my payees listed here, I have a drop down and there, look, I could choose Aldi, I can choose A1 Plumbing. They're both right here. Let's say we're writing a check to our friends at A1 Plumbing. And you'll see under description, it's put that customer number that I wrote into the new vendor record. So now I can say tell it where I want this to go. So I'm going to say we come from the Central Trust Checking, and then the expense account that I'm going to use, and in this case for the plumbing, I am going to use an expense account. I'm going to go to, let's say, there we go, building maintenance. So I'm going to use that building maintenance expense account, and I can have a line item description if I want to, but since I have my description of my customer number in the main description field, I might want to put in here that they are updating pipes. Oops, not piles, pipes. And the cost of that was, let's say, $950. So I go ahead and I can hit enter, and that'll take me over to where it says invoice. If I have an invoice number from A1 Plumbing, I can enter that there. So if they said, oh, this is number 000011122, that's your invoice. If you don't have one, that's okay. You don't need one necessarily, but it's there for you to enter if you have it, so that it makes it easier on. And then you'll see that you can lock that in or out. So if you never want to enter an invoice, then you just leave that blank and you click that little lock icon, and then you wouldn't have to even do anything in that space. So then I'm going to click either add or just hit enter on my keyboard, and that's going to bring this line down. So now what I know is that I am paying out of this account, I am paying it against this offset account, and this is the amount, and you'll see it up here, payment total is this much. it's showing me the available balance that was in my bank account and how much is pending. I'm going to, while you're looking at that, take you down right here and see that that one pending check, that's the $125 it's talking about here. So it's saying that my actual bank account balance is this, but there's this much that's already been promised by having written that check. So available to me is this much. And then now I'm writing another check for this much. So that you have a little bit of a summary up here. And yours won't look so crazy and convoluted. Mine is that way because I've got my screen resolution increased so that you guys can see everything, and it's making some crazy things happen here in the view. But so I have my whole information here. I'm going to go ahead and click save. And now I have another check up here. And you see that it says it's a check and it's pending. And you'll see over here that there's no date or document number. And if I go ahead and edit that and bring that back up, you'll see right here, I've got no date entered and there's 0 as the document number. And that's because those get applied when you print your check. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So I've got 2 checks here. I'm going to go here. I'm going to select print checks. I'll show you another way to do that here in a moment, just for fun. But this is one quick way to do it, just from that actions drop down. You choose print checks. It's going to show you, here's your book you're in, here's the bank account we're printing checks from. This is the next this is the next check number in our list, and I'll show you where that came from as well. And then this is the date of the check because we're printing it today. So now I can say I want to print both of them by just leaving those both checks, or I could say I really only want to print this one for Timothy Wright because that one was from a couple days ago and I need to get that to him. So then you'll see the check position. This is about how your check prints. We use certain forms from a company called Print Revolution that go with our checks very well. They line up really well, but you can, before you even do this, print out a little test to make sure that everything lines up with your forms. So, and then if it doesn't, you might want to like move it down a little bit on the top or whatever you need to do to try and make it, or move it left and right to try and make it line up just right so that all of the words show up in the right places and everything, and the numbers show up where the line would be for the amounts. So you can do that. You can print a test. Once you're sure that everything looks like it's going to be okay and it'll line up all right, you're going to make sure you've got your right printer selected and the right paper source. I'm leaving mine at default, and then you can click preview here. It's going to bring you up what the check looks like. So you're going to have a stub and then the check information. So stub, check, stub is how the middle checks look. And we're going to go ahead and click. I'm going to see if I can. There we go. Make it a little more obvious what it looks like. So stub, check, stub. And this is not, you don't see the writing because that writing is on the form, but you see the numbers and you see the information that would go, like here's where the memo line would go, here's where, so you have all of that information showing on your check. Then you would print it out. We're not really printing to a printer, so I'm going to pretend I'm printing it as a PDF here. We're going to say yes, I'm going to save that. And then I can either say yes, all of my check printed correctly, and then it'll be marked as printed. Or I can say, oh no, it didn't print correctly, or I want to cancel, and I can go back and do whatever change I need to do. Like I could say, oh, you know what? We actually had to scrap one of the checks because it printed upside down or something. So now I'm actually on check number 6566. Or I need to edit the total, it was incorrect, or something like that. I could say it didn't print correctly and go back and make whatever fix I need. Or I could say only some of them if I had a whole list, and then I could tell it which ones printed correctly. But we're going to go ahead and say yes, the one that we printed correctly, and it says it's finished, so we say okay, and now we only have the one here. And the reason I did those separately is so that I could show you another way that you can get to this and to the check printing view. So if we go back to activity, we just have that one left from A1 Plumbing. But let's say I want to print that and I don't want to do this for some reason. I can go to other reports and I can choose print checks here. And I'm back to that same view. So I want to print this one now. I'm going to go ahead and preview that check. You can also see I have options here. So where it says print the total amount in words, I didn't do that on the last one, so it looked a little different. So you'll notice that. And then I'll go ahead and even say I want to include dollars and cents. So I could make any of these selections. I could say don't print the memo line. I want the memo line on there though. And then so I could say I want to see all kinds of different information here. I don't want to see the heading at the top of the stub, but I want the name and address to be bold, etc. So if I had paycheck, I could say show deductions as negative. All of that can show up as options when you're printing your checks. So we're going to go ahead and do a preview of it with those selections. So we're going to make this, zoom it out again so you can see a little better. So now you'll see that it's actually listing it out in words with dollars and cents and everything. And it's hard to tell since you don't have the form showing as well, but that should line up with the actual like lines on your check forms. And then again, we'll go ahead and print. And yep, we're saving that. Yes, we'll say it printed correctly. We're going to click continue. Yes. So that's how we can print checks. And so that's what a check looks like in terms of how we create them and how we print them. Let's see. Let's go back and look at our other payment types. So we selected check the first time. If I click add here, you'll see I also have the option to add a payment by EFT, which is an electronic funds transfer. That is a payment that doesn't require you to print anything out. It's you're saying, I paid this online, or I paid this, I sent a check from my bank account. I don't need to actually print a check. I can do it as an EFT. I could also instead choose check and mark it as printed if it was a check that I wrote online on my bank account. But for basic like digital payments, like online payments that you're just paying online and you're not doing a check at all, EFT is your option. So if we select that, you'll see again that I can select whatever bank account I want it to come from. It's saying I'm paying by EFT. I still have the ability to select my payee. And this time I want to show you some of the options up here. Before, all I did was click the little drop down. If I click the little funnel, you can see that I can choose what types of payees I can see. So if I only want to look at my member-related payees, I can see that. And then the drop down is just my friend Giselle that we created today. So let's say that we're doing that. And the other option is that I could click the plus sign and create a new vendor just based on, just from right here. So if I didn't have a vendor record already, I just click the plus sign here and I don't have to close out of this, go back to the vendor's view, create the vendor, then come back and then hit add again to create my transaction. But we've already created our friend Giselle. Here she is. She's the person we're paying. And we're going to, in our description line, say reimbursement for supplies. Okay. And so we're going to say, so you'll notice that it already gave a document number and a date. And that's because an EFT doesn't have to be printed. So it's going to tell us right away the next document number in the list for an EFT and today's date. If we want to change that date, if we want to say, actually, this happened on a different day, we can select another day here easily enough, but it's going to default to today. So we also have this little checkbox over here that says add multiple. If you are going to write a whole bunch of checks or a whole bunch of EFTs or whatever kind of payment you're in, you can click that little box, and then once you save this one, it'll blank out and let you start on your next one. So that's another option that you have if you're doing all of your transactions for the last week all in one day. You can just do that over and over just by using that add multiple. So let's say, and we've got Giselle, she went out and bought supplies for us, and we're going to say it was, let's see, I office expenses. She went and bought office supplies for the office, and we're going to say that that was $96.21. And we're just going to click add. And so we've got that. We don't need a line item description. Or let's say we go, oh, you know what? I do need a line item description after all. I can click edit now that this is highlighted down here, and it'll open that line again with the information, and I can put my line item description. And I can say that it was printer cartridges. Yeah, cartridges. And I can click save, and now I know what supplies she was picking up for us. So all of that is ready. I'm ready to go. I click save, and now that transaction is complete. It's already listed as paid because I don't have to print it because it's an EFT and not a check. So, and you'll notice that right now, because I've sorted by status, that those, well, actually, let's go back and sort by date, let's say. Oops, let's go sort with the latest at the top. So you'll see I've got my checks are kind of listed at the top and then the EFTs. So let's look at the other payment type that we have here. I'm going to go ahead and click add, and you'll see charge account. Now, those of you who were with me this morning and saw how we created a liability account to represent our credit card will know what's happening right now. We're going to select charge account, and you'll see that it popped up automatically that Central Trust Visa is the one that we're going to use, and that's because it's the only one that we have that we've designated as a charge account. But since we had never done a charge account before, it's letting me select it here. When we were doing those other kinds of payments, since we had done lots of those payment types before, it was defaulting to the last account that we used for that. If we had 3 or 4 different charge accounts, it would still let me choose from them until I had done a charge payment once. And then I would have to use this again to switch to a different one, just like we looked at with the other payment types, payment types. So you'll see we've got our charge account here. We're going to do our payee this time. We'll go ahead and use Aldi since that's the one we haven't used yet that we created. And we'll say that we're paying a certain amount here. But actually, I just decided we are instead going to use a different one. Let's go to Ameren Electric here. And the reason I want to do that is because I haven't showed you the Get Last Payment button. So let's say that I regularly pay my electric bill, right? And so I'm paying it again. I can just click this button and it can say, hey, well, this is interesting. The last payment was made against a different bank or charge account. Do you want to change from Central Trust Visa to Central Trust Checking? So since this is the first time that we're using the Visa card, the last payment that was done to Ameren UE was done from the bank account. And we're going to say, no, we don't want to change. We're actually going to pay by Visa now. So we're going to say no, and that leaves it as a Central Trust Checking. It's leaving it as a charge account payment. And you'll notice that we've got some of the information already filled in because we used Get Last Payment, and our last payment used this expense account. Sorry, words are hiding from me. And this was the amount. Now let's say, well, obviously it's not always the same amount, so I need to adjust for this month's payment. So I'm going to click Edit, and I'm just going to go in here and say that it was $148.25. And I'm saving, and now I've got that, and I didn't have to enter all of the information manually. So if I save that, why did it go way down there? I guess because it's separating them out by payment type. Aha. Aha. I didn't select the date. Let's say it's already paid. There we go. So now we have that payment there. So one other thing to note, when you create a check, if you don't want to go through the trouble of going to print checks because you don't have to actually print it, but you want to record that it was a check, you can put that date in there immediately. I don't know if I said that properly. It just made me think of it when I didn't do it on the Visa payment. So if you are doing a check and you create it, you can put the date in there. It'll fill in. It'll fill in that it's paid. Actually, you fill in that it's paid and it puts the date in. You could change the date if you want to. Fill in all of your details and save it, and then it's just going to automatically show up as paid here. And then you don't have to go through the steps of saying, yes, I printed it, even though you didn't really print it, kind of thing, like I just did when I was showing you the ones that I wasn't really printing. So just want to make sure that that was clear. If you need to change the check number, I showed you that when we went to the print checks view, that you can change it in that view. You can also override the check numbers entirely. Let's say for some reason you get a whole new book of checks that's on a different numbering system than your old one. So if you go to the accounts and you go to the assets and you find that checking account, you can edit that and you can change that right here. You can say override the check number and you can put in whatever the next check number should be so that it'll know here how to take you to the next number when you print your next check. So that's that. Let's see, I think. Yeah, okay. So one of the other things that you might want to see, since we entered that credit card transaction, and now if we go actually back to the liabilities and you look at that Central Trust Visa, we had a beginning balance, if you recall, that we created of $500. We have now added $148.25 to that amount, and now we're at $648.25 that we owe on our credit card. So one more payment that I want to show you that's a little different than the other options is how to pay off your credit card once you've accrued that debt. So we're going to go ahead and click add, and this time instead of charge account, we're going to say we're going to pay it as an EFT. Let's say we're just paying it online. So we're opening this up. We're going to say this time, and I didn't create it, so let's create it here. We're going to click that little plus sign, and we're going to say Central Trust Visa. So we're going to I'll fill in all of that information later. I'm going to come back and edit that vendor, but I just want to have it here so that I can create this payment. So it's an EFT. It's coming out of our Central Trust checking. It's going to pay off our Central Trust Visa. And I can just say paying Visa bill. And the reason I want to make sure you see this is because this being a payment of a debt isn't going to go against an expense account. It's going to go against, you notice we used the expense account when we actually made the payment with the credit card. But now we're going to use the credit card as the offset account. So this Central Trust Visa, we're going to pay down that amount. Let's say we're only paying off the $500. We're not paying the whole bill just yet. So we're going to click add, and we're going to click save. And now we've done that payment against the liability account. So if we go back to the accounts view, you can see the beginning balance was $500. It's now changed a total of this much because we added $148 to it and then we paid off the $500. So now we're back to just having a current balance of $148.25. So that's the liability, and we used it as the offset in that payment. Let's talk about receipts now. We're going to go to the receipts view here. So we're in activity, And instead of payments, we've chosen receipts on the side. We've got a list of all of our past receipts here, and we're going to create a new one. Let's say that, remember this morning, some of you, that we created a new account for a food pantry. It was a dedicated account. And that was because we wanted to have, we are opening a food pantry, we wanted to sequester that money from all of our other offerings. Now, when I say we're sequestering that money, that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be deposited at the same time as that other money. So we're going to show you how that works. I'm going to click add here. So we're doing a deposit. We'll pretend that this was an offering batch. Actually, first let's just talk about the food pantry. Let's go to, so we've got an offering that came specifically for the food pantry. It's a donation that helped us establish our food pantry. So we're just going to go ahead and click this drop down, and we'll find that food pantry. There it is. And you'll see that I have this enter by name box checked, and that showed up in alphabetical order. If I uncheck that, then they'll show up in numerical order, and all of the 017, which is my dedicated accounts, will be at the bottom. So I have the option to either look for a name or a number, and I can also, if I'm doing that, if I'm putting in the name, I can start typing. So if I wanted the building fund, I'd just start typing building, and it would get me to that. Or once again, if I want my food pantry, I start typing food pantry, and it gets me to that. So I've selected food pantry, and we're going to say this is the initial grant for the food pantry. And it was given by so-and-so. And it was in the amount of $20,000. So we've got 20000. Okay. And we click add. So now we've got $20,000 that's been deposited into that food pantry account. So if you'll recall, we created that account. It didn't have a beginning balance. It would have been at 0. So we're going to go ahead and save that. And then we'll just take a little quick peek over here at our dedicated accounts. And here's our food pantry. The beginning balance was 0. We've received $20,000. The change is $20,000. And now our current balance is $20,000. So that was my initial thing that somebody gave us to help start our food pantry. But let's say now that we've got an offering batch and people are giving to that food pantry along with all of our other general offering types of things. So I can do one transaction. So I'm doing add here, and it's today, and we're going to, under description, say offering batch from, let's see, Sunday was the 17th. 11/17/2024, and let's say that then we have there was to the general fund a total of $550, and to the mission fund there was $200, and to that food pantry fund, so that's the fund. So these are income accounts that are just called fund, but this is the dedicated account fund that's food pantry. And let's see, there was $175 that was given for the food pantry. So I clicked add, and you'll see over here for Central Trust checking, it's going to be a total receipt of $925. And that goes against 2 income accounts and the 1 dedicated fund. So I can then save that. We'll go back over and look at our little dedicated account here, our food pantry account. Now we're at a current total of $20,175. And we can start spending money to stock the shelves in our new food pantry. But we've already done our payments, so we will just assume that that's going to happen. Our imaginary people will take over from there to get that done. So let's talk about another transaction type. We're going to talk about journal entries next. Now, journal entries are the kinds of transactions that you might do to make a correction if you made a mistake, or to change whatever kind of information. So you can either maybe use it to transfer money from one account to another, make that correction, all those sorts of things. And the thing about a journal entry is this is where you can see the debits and credits. All of those other transactions, when you create them, the system is handling what's a debit and what's a credit for you. This is the flexible kind of transaction type where you tell it what to debit and what to credit. And so we're going to take a little pause before we create any of these and talk about debits and credits a little more. So I'm going to take you to help up here. And I mentioned before that we were going to see a couple of things in help. So before we get to the debits and credits, I'm going to show you that under training here, there's that videos view. So when I click on that, you'll see that you have some of our previous webinars here that have been, so there you go. You can see one from attendance from last year. Here's one from contributions from another time, also probably last year. So you can see that this is where some of them will show up. Well, this is where all of them will show up eventually. It's probably not the first place they'll show up. You'll probably get a link to see them in our Help Center first. But they will eventually be available, these webinars, under that training and videos. Just wanted to show you that while we were getting to what I want to show you about debits and credits, which is going to be under our user's guide here, which is going to take us to the Shepherd Staff Help Center, which I hope some of you have seen in the past. And I'm going to just type in debits here so that we can get that and you'll see debits and credits. We're going to get this article that's going to show you. This is the little chart. This I'm showing you right here. This is what I have pinned to my wall in my little cubicle because I reference it every day. I suppose one day I might memorize all what gets debited and what gets credited in any transaction type, but I still look at it every time just to make sure. So when you're doing a transaction, each account type behaves differently, whether it's being increased or decreased. So when you're increasing an asset, it's being debited. When you're decreasing an asset, it's being credited. And for a liability, it's the opposite. Equity is the same as liability. Income is the same as liability and equity, but expense is the same as assets. So you see, like, if I wanted to reflect a regular payment of like that electric bill that we did, then what that check did was it decreased my asset account because I was paying out that money, and it increased my expense account. It debited it so that I could see that I had paid that money out when I do my income and expense report later in the year. So the debits from that expense and the credits from the bank account, those balanced each other out, and that made it a solid transaction. So another type of situation you might do is if you were doing a deposit, it would increase your bank account, and it would also increase your income account, and that would show as a debit and a credit that would also be equal. So when you're doing a journal entry, it just doesn't do that for you automatically. You have to tell it what you're debiting and what you're crediting. So I'm going to slide that back out of the way and remind you that you can get to that by going to Help, choosing User's Guide, and if you look for debits and credits, you'll find that article and you'll be able to see that chart too. Let me then take you in and we're going to do a journal entry. Let's pretend that we made a mistake on an old transaction. We deposited some money to the wrong income account, let's just say. So we want to correct that. So this is going to be a correction. And let's say that we deposited that money to, and I want to show you something else that I didn't show you before, is this little filter button. You can make it easy on yourself for any given transaction if you want to, so that you only have to look at income accounts while in the drop down, save yourself a little time. But don't forget you've done that, because you'll have to change it again when you want to go see other account types. So let's say that we accidentally deposited into the general fund an amount of money that was supposed to go to a different fund. So we're going to select the general fund, and we're going to decrease that, and that's done with a debit. So we're going to say that $100 went to the general fund that wasn't supposed to. So that's our first line, and we're going to click add. So now you'll see it shows debits of 100, credits of 0. It's not going to let me save this transaction because I'm not in balance yet, right? So now I have to balance it out by saying where that money should have been. So I'm going to make that correction and say that it actually should have gone to the music ministry. And then we're going to credit that. Now notice, I didn't say it before, but you'll see that there's a little arrow next to debit and next to credit. I'm trying to point, but my big cursor's doing weird stuff on me. But you'll see right next to the word debit, it points down, and right next to the word credit, it points up. So we have debited already. Now we need to increase that music ministry by the same amount. And we're going to click add. And now you see that my debits and my credits match, and I've got a balanced transaction. Now this is what this is doing is on my income and expense report, it was previously showing this $100 as having gone to my general fund. I'm saying, nope, that $100 didn't go to the general fund, it went to the music ministry. So it's decreasing the general fund income account by $100 and increasing the music ministry income account by $100 so that they are corrected. So then I'm going to put that in my description. Correcting income 100 should have been music instead of general. Okay, so I click save, and then you can see that I have that transaction here. I'll just drag that over so you can see my big long description that I put in there. So I've made a correction to that account. Let's talk about other things that we might do as a journal entry. For example, this morning we created a CD account, and we talked about how we could have created it with a beginning balance if it was an existing account that we were just adding into Shepherd staff after the fact. But since it was one that we were just now creating, and we were taking that money out of our bank account and putting it in this CD account, we wanted to have a transaction for it. So I'm going to go ahead and add that transaction. And we're going to talk about this. This is going to be a transfer, and a transfer, depending on what you're doing here, transfer between two assets, you want to be very careful about, because you can have a problem with your reconciliation if you're not. So if it's two bank accounts and you're going to reconcile both of them, you want to make sure that there's a transaction for each of them. We're going to pretend that this CD is one like that so that you can see what that looks like. So let's pretend that this CD is something that we're going to have to reconcile. And so we want to have a transaction for it and a transaction for the bank account that the money came from. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a transfer. So we're going to have, so we have our information. We're going to say transfer from checking to CD. So we're going to take, actually we're going to do transfer from checking to transfer account. And we're going to go here and we're going to choose that checking account. Let's go by not number instead of name so I can find my assets. There we go, Central Trust Checking. And we're going to decrease that Central Trust Checking by $2,000 because that's the amount of that CD. Now we got to find a transfer account. Let's see. Hopefully I have one already created. I think I've just realized I do not. Okay, let me real quick show you what you do when you run into this situation. We're going to have to cancel that. We're going to go over to accounts. I'm going to go ahead and create that transfer account as a dedicated account because that way it can go in or out and it's nice and easy. So we're going to go add. We're just going to call it transfer. It's going to be none. It doesn't go in any category because all we use it for is transferring money from one account to another. So we're going to save that. We're going to make it a dedicated account. It's pretty much always going to be zero except for those moments when we're creating those transfers in between creating the one side and the other side. So I'll go back and I'll show you what that looks like again here now that I actually have an account to use. So I'm here. We're doing transfer from checking for CD. And we're going to select that checking account and we're going to uncheck the enter by name option again. We're going to go up here and find my Central Trust checking. We're going to decrease that by the $2,000. Add. And then we're going to go here and we're going to find that transfer account. We do want to enter by name this time. Okay. There's my transfer account. And this time, since we credited the other one, we're going to debit this one. You'll notice that that's decreasing the account, which means we're putting it into the negative while we're doing this transfer, which is a little wonky, but it's okay because it's really just a place filler that'll allow this transaction to have two halves so that you can use one to reconcile your bank account and the other to reconcile the CD account. So I'll explain a whole lot more about that in tomorrow's onboarding webinar. Keep saying onboarding. But we're going to add this row. So now you'll see we've got that $2,000. We're going to save it. So now that $2,000 is no longer showing as being part of the Central Trust checking. So if we went back to the accounts view, if we had known exactly what our balance was, we could see that that $2,000 had been reduced. But we're going to now then create the other half of the transaction. I can either add that transaction and do it all over again in reverse to put it in the other one. I could also take that original transaction that I'm doing transfers from CD, checking for CD, and I'm going to click copy. And this time I'm going to say transfer to CD from checking via transfer account. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, this is just a way to save a tiny bit of time. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to say edit. So we're still doing that transfer account, but we're going to switch the credits and debits so that it goes back to zero. So that's why it doesn't really matter that we made it negative when we created the first part of it. So we're saving that. Now you'll see my credits and debits are all kinds of out of whack, and that's because we have to change this entirely as well. Because this time it needs to go to the CD account and it needs to be a debit, which will increase it. So we're going to change from Central Trust checking to Farmers Bank CD. And then we're going to get rid of the credits and we're going to put it in the debits because that will increase it. And we save. And now we have our new transaction and the credits and debits match again. So I can save that. And we'll be able to see that when we do our reconciliation in tomorrow's session. So here we do one transaction to transfer from the checking into or against a transfer account and then into the CD against that same transfer account. So when you go back to the accounts and you look at that dedicated account that we created as transfer, you see the beginning was 100. There's been 2,000 in and 2,000 out. So the change is zero and the current is zero. So that's all that account will ever be used for is to do that. So it'll always be at zero except for the time between when you create the one transaction and the other. Okay, so that's a journal entry. Let's talk about recurrent transactions. So we're going to go back to activity here. A recurring transaction is a transaction that, let's say, for example, that electric bill. We do have to pay it every month, so we might as well make it easy on ourselves, right? So you'll see here under activity, there's this option for recurrent, and I have a whole bunch of different bills and things that are created frequently. You'll see some of them have a next date, you know, have different next dates. And you can see that I haven't created all of these for the current date because we're already up to the 19th, and there's some that should be created for the past. I left that so that you could see what it looks like when we get that far. But let's say that, okay, so electric bill I already have in here. So let's go look at that payment that we just did to A1 Plumbing. We're going to pretend that this is a recurring payment that we do every year or something like that. So I'm going to edit that. Actually, I'm not going to edit it. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to make it recurring. So this is my A1 Plumbing. I'm going to click this recurrent, and it says make a recurrent template from the selected payment. I'm clicking that, and it says, hey, are you sure you want to do that? You want to create a recurring transaction? And I'm going to say yes. So it's going to pop this view up. This is my recurring transaction. And you'll see that it's got my payee, it's got my information. Here's the bank account, here's the offset account, here's the amount. Let's say that, and then here's a spot to put in the frequency. So let's say that we do this annually. So then I could say the next time I want it to happen, well, we just did it. So let's say we want it to be in November of 2025. So I could say that it's going to happen again on next November 19th. And then I could say that it should stop on a certain date, or I can check this box and say it should never stop. So for some reason, we're replacing our pipes. We're updating pipes every year. So that's an annual recurring transaction. And if I click save, then you'll see it's taken me to the recurrent transaction list, and it's put that one in there for 11/19/2025. It will automatically generate a transaction, and I will be able to see that when that time comes. You'll see that under stop date, most of these have an actual stop date of the end of next year or whenever. And then some of them have that they'll stop in 9999. When you click that it doesn't have an end date, that's actually an end date. It's just an end date so far in the future that hopefully none of us will ever have to deal with it. Unless we get to be cryogenically frozen and woken up to do more accounting later. So that's one kind of recurrent transaction you can have, is you go to an existing transaction and you make it recurrent. So we can do that with any kind of payment or receipt. You'll see here's this weekly offerings one has been entered as a recurring transaction. We might have a regular rental income or something that we get. We could create that as a recurring transaction. Anything that we wanted to, income expense, we could even do recurring journal entries. Let's say that we wanted to create every month we deposit $5,000 from checking into savings, because we're saving money and we're doing good. So I could create that as a recurring transaction, but I would have to create it as two, since we have to do the one for each side of those accounts so that we can do that reconciliation. So that's what a recurring transaction looks like. Let's talk about how to actually generate them. So it doesn't auto-generate. You have to actually come to your recurring transaction views. So you come to the recurrent under activity, and you come down to the bottom, and I do apologize that that button looks so funky. I've got my stuff zoomed in so much that it's acting crazy. But I'm clicking the button to generate, and it's going to pop up a box here and say, do I want to generate these transactions for all of the displayed templates, or do I want to do it just for the ones that I select? So I can select like a specific one or several. I can hold down Control and click on different ones. So I can select as many as I want, like that, or I can say, let's do it for all of them. So let's say that we're going to do it for all of them, and we want to put the next date that's listed in the next date column. So for some of them, it'll be the 8th, for some at the 10th, for some the 14th, etc. It's not going to create them for beyond now, but it will create them up until. So we can say we're going to create all of these transactions for the next date that's on the list for those transactions. We're going to say OK. You're about to create 22 transactions. Do you want to continue? And there's 22 here plus this new one that we created that's annual. So, yep. we want to create all of those transactions. But I'm going to say no first, and I'm going to show you. If we go to payments, for example, there's only 2 here listed for the 14th. There's none for the 10th or the 8th. So let's go back and do that, and then you'll see when it generates them. We're going to say yes for all of them. We're going to say okay. About to create 22 transactions. Yes. So it's saying the generation process successfully completed. 22 transactions were created. So if I close out of here and I go back over to payments, now you'll see I have a whole bunch for the 14th. Here's the ones for the 10th. Here's those ones for the 8th. All of those transactions were automatically created. And since they were all EFTs, they've all already been listed as paid. If I had created those as checks that needed to be printed out, they'd be showing pending here. And then I would have to go in and do print checks and print them all out so that they could be sent out in the mail or whatever. But I've set them all up as EFTs just because I was trying to establish a bunch of transactions. So you can see how that looks here. And that's the gist of recurring transactions. They're a very handy way to save yourself the effort of having to write out each of those transactions if they're weekly, monthly, bi-monthly, whatever kinds of things that you need to do. You can also create one just by clicking add here and say, I want to do a regular payment. I can select my payee. I can select how often it is and create that transaction. I can do it by EFT. I can do it by check or charge account. I can create it all right here. And then it'll be added to my list and I can generate it for however often I want to do that. I'll show you some of the other frequencies that you can do. Let's look at this one. So you'll see that it's weekly and it's being done here. The next one is the 21st. It's set to stop in 2025. So when we generated this one, it was for the 14th. So this is one of the ones that we generated for the 14th. It's a weekly one, so the next one is automatically queued up to be done on the 21st. So when you're creating them, you can do all different possible options here. You could say, I want to do it just one time on a date, but I want it to be scheduled ahead of time, so I'm doing it in this recurrent transactions view. I could say it's going to happen weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. I can have it be done at the end of the month, at the 1st and 15th of the month. I can have it quarterly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All kinds of options that I can set up ahead of time and have them happen frequently until it's time to stop or just keep on going forever. Once they're created and you look in the view here, they look just like whatever they were created to look like. So here's this one, Meridian Waste Services. It had the sewer bill listed here. That's why that particular vendor had sewer bill in the vendor customer number field, because it then automatically filled in the description for me. So that's your recurring transactions. Let's talk a little bit about the reports and things that you can view based on your transactions. So we're going to go over to other reports. And again, there will be a whole nother session about reporting specifically tomorrow, but this is going to be just about the reports that are directly relevant to the transactions. So first thing we'll look at is the general ledger. This is, you can set any date range that you want, and it's going to list out all of the transactions for that date range for whatever selection you make. So you see that you have some options here. You can select for one or another book if you had more than one book. You can select what account types you want to show. And then I'm going to show you how this starts off at account type and then goes major, minor group, and then the actual accounts. These do not affect one another. So you don't have to say, first I want only assets, and then I want only the assets from this particular major group and this particular minor group. If I just want one account, I can just go over here and say, I want to see only transactions that are related to a particular expense account, let's say, office expense. So I can just uncheck all of them and go to account. I don't have to mess with any of this up here if I don't want to. So let's say I wanted to see all of my transactions that were related to office expense, and I want level of detail. I just want to summarize. And I can say I want to include accounts with no activity. I can say I want to include whatever. That isn't going to make as much difference when I'm doing summarize. So I'm going to show you that by clicking print here. It's going to give me a preview. Now you'll notice that that's $96.21. That's that transaction we did today, which is why I picked this particular expense account. It's not one that I've used in a whole bunch of recurring transactions, so I don't have a big long list. But I'll show you what one of those would look like. So let's go to let's see. Oops, I went too far. Okay, let's look at the electric bill. So this is all of my electric expenses from the beginning of the year until now. I could change that date range if I want to. I can do whatever. And I swear I have more expenses than that. Oh, because guess what? I'm looking at the summary. So this is just giving me a sum total. So if I choose my level of detail and I choose detail activity, then it's going to give me all of those transactions that are relevant to that. So you'll see I have a full page of everything from the beginning of the year until now. And it's showing me the amounts. It's showing me the running total of these transactions. That's not giving you a balance of an account so much as it is. Well, in this case, it is giving you a balance of the electric expense account, but that's because I have the full year selected. If I didn't, then if I did just a month, it would say balance, but it would just be a running total of the transactions that are listed. You can see that I can choose, I could go back to saying I want to see absolutely everything, and that's going to give me a really long report, which I guess is going to take a little while. There we go. So you can see that it'll list it out by account. So here's all of the transactions that were done out of that checking account. And if I go all the way to the last page, you'll see that that's 73 pages later, I'm getting to that food pantry, the transactions that we did for that food pantry. So that initial deposit and the $175 offering batch from the offering batch. So if I go back and I look at some of those expense accounts, let's look at the expense accounts that were involved. So lawn care, I'm seeing all of these transactions were done against that central trust checking. So these transactions are actually showing up twice. So let's say I just want to see the details of the transactions themselves. I just want to see the balances, the totals of the transactions themselves. I might decide I only want to see asset accounts then. So that's where I might do type. If I only look at asset accounts, then I'm not going to see the asset account plus whatever income or expense account it was done against or everything. I'll just see one entry for each of the transactions, except in the case where it was a transfer like that last one that we did in the journal entries. So that'll give me a little bit more information without 73 pages to print. It's still 20 because it's a lot of transactions, but it's a lot of useful and important details that you might need. So you can do that by summarizing activity or detailed activity. So the summarizing one will just give you for each account in whatever selection you made. So this is for each asset account that had transactions during the year, a summary of the totals. So you'll see that for the central trust checking, it's giving you a summary of all the receipts and all of the payments and all of the journal entries that were done against that bank account. So that's the general ledger. There's also individual register reports. So you can see there's a receipt register and a journal entry register that'll list off all of the transactions for whatever date range you choose here, sorted by either date or document number or vendor or whatever. And then you can say whether they reference a specific account. You can say you want to see line items or hide line items. You can do subtotals and things. So each of those reports has its own special options, but let's go ahead and click print and take a quick look at our journal entry register. So you'll see these are some of the ones that we looked at today, because I haven't done a lot of journal entries in this database. but each of them are showing here that we did today. There's that $100 where we transferred the money from the general fund to the music ministry because we'd made a mistake on the income. There's the Central Trust checking and Farmers Bank CD transfer. So that's 2 journal entries to make that one transaction happen properly so that we can reconcile it when we do our session tomorrow. So that's a journal entry register. There's also a receipt register here. You can see that'll show you all of the receipts. It's giving you all of the information for each basically offering batch is what we're mostly seeing here, and all of the different income accounts that money went into. And it's all for Central Trust checking here. And if you go on to the end, there's 11 pages worth, and it shows you all of the different information for each of those receipts. Then you can also see that it's referencing specific accounts, just like the journal entries, and you can hide line items and et cetera and so forth. Just like the journal entries, the one that's a little different is your payment register. It's got a little extra because you can filter it by payment method. So you could set it to only show you checks, or only show you charge account payments, or only show you EFTs, or you could set it to show you all 3. So you can make that selection, but only on the payment register one, because it's the only one that has 3 different transaction types within the payment transactions. So let's look at all of them for, let's say we'll just do for the month of January. So through 1/31/2024. So there's all of our payments that were done during that time period. So you'll notice that we've got a bunch of EFTs. These are a lot of salary transactions. So you can see that there are a bunch of withholdings under liabilities. And then we have the expense accounts, and they're all out of the Central Trust checking, which you see at the top. So that is those reports. Let's see. The other thing that I want to show you is, since we talked about the vendors and how you create them, let's look at some of the vendor reports you can do. So you saw that you can look at the activity and everything within the vendor record, but you can also come here and do vendor activity and summaries. And that's going to give you for a date range, and you can select vendor types, or you can select certain bits of information, or you could select a specific vendor. If you want to, and then you have some formats that you can choose. So you can do summaries and W-2s, activity details, summaries, etc. So let's say we wanted to do a summary with W-2 for 2024. If I did that and I wanted to do it for anybody who's not a business or a church or a agency or the government, let's say. So I'm going to do that, and you'll see here I have Teresa Carter. She's an employee. You see that we're under employees right here. And here is the summary of what all her transactions were for the year. So she, from Central Trust Checking, we paid her $51,000 so far this year. Here are the withholdings. And then here was the part that was actually from us. So this is the employee looking ones. Let's look at member. So there's that one that we did for Giselle, where we were just reimbursing her. So then there you see that here's just what we've given her. That's that one transaction from the checking account and offsetting by that expense account. You can also do a vendor directory or print out labels for sending stuff to vendors, all right here. But I realize now that we're running a little late, so I am going to switch us back over, and we'll do a couple of the quiz questions anyway, and not all of them, because I don't want to take up your whole afternoon, and for all I know, you've already given up on me. So let's take a quick look here. True or false, an EFT should be entered as a receipt. And I'm going to go ahead and put that poll up there. And you can tell me what you think. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that, share the results, and we'll go back over here and we'll look at the answer. And the answer is false. An EFT is an electronic funds transfer. That's an electronic payment and would be entered in the payments view. So let's look at our next one. Check numbers are system generated and cannot be overwritten. Is that true or false? Okay, I'll go ahead and end that one again. And the answer is false. You can override the check numbers. You set them up and then they're system generated based on what you set them to, but you can change it if you need to. For example, if a check form got put in upside down and you had to throw it away, you need to print the same check on a different sheet of paper. Now the number is going to be different because your paper has the number. You can type that in manually on that view, or you can go to edit the account and change what the next number is going to be there. So you have options for that. So we'll go ahead and do one more. True or false? Only pending checks will be shown in the print queue. Let's go ahead and launch that one. Okay, I'll go ahead and end that and show the results. And that's true. If a check needs to be printed from the system, you leave it as pending. You don't put in a date, you don't put in a check number or whatever, you leave it as pending, and then it becomes printable. So you can go to the print checks view and it'll show there in the list. If it doesn't need to be printed, then you would just go ahead and mark it as paid when you create the check, and then it won't show up in the print queue. So we're going to skip the rest of these quiz questions so that we can get to time for your questions, because that's the most important thing, is to make sure we get all of your questions answered. So I am going to pop over to the questions view here and see how we're doing. And it looks like, Tim, you're wonderful. It looks like he's answered most everything. So I'm going to just check here real quick and see if there's anything that still needs to be asked. And if you have any questions that haven't been answered yet, go ahead and feel free to type them into the questions view there. Okay, looks like there was one question about recurrent transactions or how that will affect things. Let's look at, okay. Aha, yes. So I apologize for the confusion, Karen. When you're entering offerings, you would obviously do those through contributions. I was just trying to show what a transaction would look like. Those transactions would normally automatically be generated when you post the batch in offerings. It'll create a payment receipt in the finance module. But I just wanted to show what that receipt would look like and how it would be entered if you were doing it manually. So thank you for answering that, Tim. And let's see what else we have. Aha. So yeah, let's talk about voids, because I didn't mention that, and that's obviously a very legitimate thing to look at. I'm going to pull up Shepherd Staff again here, and let's look at some of our recent activity, and let's pretend that we need to void that transaction for Giselle. Let's say she's decided that she actually wants to just donate those cartridges this time. She doesn't want any payment. She's refusing the check. She's not going to take it. So we're just going to go ahead and edit that. And we're going to come down here to the bottom of the screen and click void. And do you want to void this payment? That will set all line item amounts to 0, and I can say yes. And it says this payment has been voided. So when I click OK, it's going to take me back out of there, and you'll notice that it doesn't even show here, and that's because my filter shows all but void. If I change that and I say no filter, or if I say I want to see voided ones, let's go ahead and do that so we can see that specific one. So here it is, it's a 0, it's been voided. It can't be unvoided, unfortunately. You could copy it, but it won't have any totals in there, but you could then come back in here and put the amount back in to copy it and recreate it, because at least it would have all the other right information. But there's not really an unvoid option. So let's see what else we've got here. Okay, looks like you handled the one that you had pretty well, Harold, so that's good. Okay, so here's a question that we got was, why the transfer account? Why not credit the bank and debit the CD? And the reason that we did that way is because, well, I was showing it to you. In a regular situation with a CD, you probably don't need to reconcile a CD as a bank account. But I wanted to make sure that you saw how you would do a transfer if you did need to reconcile both accounts. And tomorrow, when we do that session on reporting and reconciliation, you'll see a little bit more about how that looks. But basically, when you have two different asset accounts, if you create only one transaction and you clear it under the one bank account, then when you go to reconcile your other bank account, there's no transaction there to clear. And that leaves you in a bad spot. So if you create a two-sided transaction using that transfer account, then you're able to clear the transaction in both reconciliations and you don't have that problem. I hope that makes sense. If not, let me know. You can reach out to us. We'll be happy to talk about it in more depth if you'd like. Looks like that's the last question on the list, and I've gone a good 15 minutes over time. So I will stop stealing from your day and let you all get on with it. I hope it's a wonderful day, and I hope this was a useful session for you. Thanks a lot.